Hello, guys. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. Your strange things do happen in Africa. There is a message that I once posted on another platform. So the message was from one of our dear listeners who were saying that he used to drive for these other men who had a lot of cars, Toyota Avanza cars. So he used to drive one of those Toyota Avanzas, and they used to transport kids. And this man, he then became so rich, but he was saying that he was chosen amongst the drivers since he was the only one who came from Zim. So he said that you are the only one that I can trust, whom I can show this secret. So what they did is that he said that one day they went and they collected the kids as usual, but the boss said that I want you to collect only 4 kids in the car, not a lot of kids like they used to pack them in their Toyota Avanza. After that, he said that he lied to the parents as he had been told by the boss. The boss told him to lie to the parents that the car had gotten stuck by the side of the road and he was on his way. But he said that they drove for about 40 kilometers out of town. Then they went to this other village. When they went to that village, the kids were now taken out of that Toyota Avanza, and one by one they were given some herbs, and then they were given a knife, and they were told that they had to place the knife on top of this other goat that was about to be slaughtered. And after that process was done, the man said that his South African boss then started stabbing that goat. He started stabbing the goat on the neck until that goat had died. And after that, the kids were then taken and they were told that they had to dip their feet in that dish that was full of blood. After the ritual had been done, then they returned the kids back and they gave the kids some herbs so that they would never understand what exactly had happened. They went and they dropped the kids one by one back to their parents' house. And this man, he said that after they had performed all of these rituals, the boss then started making a lot of money. He said that one day the boss just bought a brand new Porsche, and after the boss had started making a lot of money, he started treating this man who was from Zim, who used to be his driver, badly. And the man was scared that maybe the boss was going to hire a hitman because he knew everything that he had done. Well, the guy then ran away, but he's still being troubled by those rituals that his boss did. The boss made him to do the rituals as well. And he was saying that what happened was that these kids, when they were being given the charms by that traditional healer or sangoma, their stars, they were stolen from them. Strange things do happen. So after posting that message, there is this woman who came with her WhatsApp voice note. So the woman was saying, "Dear brother Nashi, how are you? Can you please post my own story as hidden identity? My brother, I heard that other story that you posted, and it has reminded me of what my husband did. But my husband, unfortunately, he has since passed away. My husband, when he died, this was in 2016, he only survived on these rituals for only a couple of months. Then he passed away. But I suspect that my husband, he was lied to by this man who gave him these charms. I think that they just saw that my husband was foolish enough to believe that he was going to be accepted into their club, the club of ritualists. Before my husband had met up with this man, it was somewhere around 2014 when we started working on this other farm. Before that, me and my husband, we used to work on another farm which is in Limpopo. But when we were working on that farm, my husband had a problem with one of the foremen. Then, without our knowledge, that man, he cancelled our work permits. And when we had traveled back home in December, when we were returning back, we then found out that this is what had happened. And we felt so desperate. We then went to this other farm where a lot of work permits were being given if you were working on that farm. The farm is close to the South African Botswana border. We worked there, and we then got our 1 year work permits. When we were working there, me and my husband, we sat down one day and we were like, this thing of working for white people, if you keep on working and working, just using the money, not doing anything, one day the person is just going to fire you. Look what they did to us on that farm, yet you were trying to be a very hard worker. So my husband then said, what do you suggest, my wife, that we do? Look, the money that we are earning, even if we try to open up a grocery store, we are never going to make any profit. Maybe if we get into transport, maybe we'll make a lot of money. When my husband said we can get into transport, I got interested and I was like, what kind of transport? He said, I will think about it. One night after we had returned back from work, my husband said, how about we buy a bakkie? Then after buying an old bakkie, and we start like transporting goods from South Africa, going with them to Zim. And this was like a good idea. And that was what we started doing. We worked very hard. This was not easy. We didn't get this thing overnight. We worked so hard. We would only eat like your soft porridge with eggs. Sometimes just cooking eggs with water, because we were trying to save. We would make sure that the money that was entering into our pockets will not leave our pockets so easily. Then my husband spoke with one of his brother. The brother was in Northwest. That is where we went to buy that bakkie. It was an old Toyota bakkie, but a very good one, a 4x4. We went and we bought it, and then we started collecting goods from people around the farms that wanted to send their groceries to Zim. And we started making a little bit of money. Within a couple of months, we were making money. Then our boss, the farmer, he felt jealous. He didn't want this type of business on his farm. That was when he said that our work at that farm was finished. I said to my husband, what do we do? Should we continue working for this man? But my husband said, we need to move out of this farm. We then moved out of that farm. That was when we arrived in Polokwane. And whilst we were in Polokwane, my husband then started working for another white man, but he was delivering bread there. He was working like really hard, and we were actually getting a lot of money from his job. So after a couple of months, what we were doing was that whilst my husband was working, we had hired one driver who was transporting the goods and taking them to Zim. That is how we were making money. But my husband, then he messed up at his workplace, because the boss, he had trusted my husband a lot. And when my husband had been trusted by the boss, my husband and this other manager at this other small supermarket, they made a deal. What they will do is that my husband, he would go with the bread there, but this bread that you would take there early in the morning, they would have baked it overnight. Then the boss will not know anything. Then they will sell that bread first in that supermarket, and after that they would bring the bread that is the invoices. Well, my husband and that manager, they were eventually caught, and my husband was fired. After he had been fired, we then moved from that area in Limpopo and we went to the Northwest, where my husband's brother was working. My husband, as someone who was highly experienced, when he was throwing around his CVs at different companies, he quickly got a job. He was now working as a side tipper driver, those big trucks. So he was working there. He was now making a lot of money. And with that other car that we had, we were now living a very comfortable life. While he was working as a tipper driver. So the problem with my husband was that he was a man. When he is going around looking for something, he can just ask anyone. And I used to tell him that this thing that you do, I do not like it. Like at that time, he was saying that he wanted to buy a quantum taxi. So he would stop any taxi driver and just ask them if they were selling the taxi or what. This was not a nice thing for me, because I was afraid that we were going to get robbed. One day, whilst we were driving, that was when we saw this other patrol car, but it was a taxi association patrol car. We then stopped that car, and I told my husband that this thing that he was doing, it was quite a crazy, reckless thing to do. he stopped that car and he confirmed with those men if their boss was like selling any taxi, or if anyone in the taxi association was selling off their taxi. And they took my husband's number. Within a couple of days, we then received a confirmation, and my husband was like, you see, I am a hustler. We then went and we met with that taxi boss, and he showed us the taxi that he was selling. But I was really doubtful. The price for this taxi, it was really brand new, it was still nice, and then they said that the price was only 78,000. That was the price that they were selling that taxi. This taxi, it was still brand new. I pulled my husband to the side and I said, this thing that you want to do tomorrow, we are going to regret it. The moment that you take out the money, you show them the money, they are going to take out their guns and you are going to suffer. Please, let us just go back home. But my husband, he refused. He said that this is a good deal. This is a good deal. I am not going to let it go. We then went after the man had given us his account number, and we deposited the money into that man's account. When we would use one ATM, we will go to another ATM until we had deposited all the money into his bank account. The man had sent one of his workers with us who was driving that taxi that we were in the process of purchasing. After we had deposited the money, we then returned back to that man's house, and I was like, here it is, we are going to be shot today. These men, they are going to kill us. But to my surprise, when we arrived there, the man, he actually had a contract that was from his lawyers. My husband signed, as well as the witnesses. From there on, that is how my friend became friends with that man, and they became so much good friends. This man was like, I also want to go into these routes of cross-border transportation. They used to talk a lot until one day my husband, he came back, and when he came back, he was holding this small bottle, and I asked him what was this thing that was inside that small bottle. He said that it is some charms that he had been given by his new friend so that his taxi will never be involved in an accident and he won't operate at a loss. I said, but have we ever gone to a traditional healer? If I wanted us to go to a traditional healer, you know very well that from the family where I come from, my mother, she used to be a traditional healer. My uncle is a traditional healer. If I wanted this thing to be done, we could have gone back home and we could have done this thing. I grew up living in this environment. I do not want this thing to go to be extended to my future generations. Why have you placed me in such a situation? The man said, then my husband then said that, look, before I had bought this taxi, you were actually saying that I was going to get robbed, but look at this good taxi that we have. We now have 2 cars. We are now in business, and you know very well that my relatives are going to bewitch me. I do not want them to bewitch me. I want to be far ahead of them. That is how I agreed. And for him to use these herbs, me and him, we had to use these herbs together. We got out of the house. This was like late at night when people were no longer walking around, and then we poured that charm that was inside that small bottle into a bucket of water. It was a 20-liter bucket of water. Then we stripped ourselves naked whilst we were standing next to that same taxi. After stripping ourselves naked, then he said that I had to bend over so that he can penetrate me. After he had penetrated me, we made love. Just when he was about to produce, he then produced his seed into that bucket that was full of water. Then we continued washing the taxi. We washed it, and he said that he had been told that he had been told that if we wash this taxi with this seed after making love to me, then what was going to happen was that the taxi would never have any accident or any bad luck. That was fine, my brother, because we were already deep into this thing. We then started operating. We made so much money. Within a short period of time, we had actually purchased a grinding mill straight from China. It was on its way when troubles started. just when this grinding mill that we had purchased, a very big one from China, when it was at the Durban port, that was when my husband started to lose his mind. One night when we were in bed, my husband, he woke up. He was the one who woke me up, and he was shouting. He was shouting. He was shouting. I asked him what was going on with him, and he looked at me and he said to me, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" That was when he woke up from the bed and he started looking for a weapon so that he can kill me. He kept on shouting, "I want blood, I want blood, I want blood." He was no longer communicating with me in our mother tongue, but he was now communicating with me in Tswana. And when he was communicating with me in Tswana, he kept on saying that, "I want blood, I want blood, I want blood." So I managed to escape from the bedroom because he was looking for a dangerous weapon so that he can hit me with that weapon. When I escaped from the bedroom, I then stood by the bedroom door and I was holding the bedroom door, and I didn't want him to get out of the bedroom because this was a matter of life and death. After that, my brother, when I saw that my husband was no longer shouting at me, I then opened the door. When I opened the door, I nearly fainted because I saw that my husband, he had now collapsed to the ground, and when he had collapsed to the ground, he was no longer lying on the ground, but it was like there was something that was suspending him in the air, and there was a lot of saliva that was just coming out of his mouth. A lot of saliva, my brother. I had never seen someone producing a lot of saliva like that. When I saw everything that was happening, that was when I took my phone and I tried to contact my mother, but my mother, she was not available because this was like late at night. Then I communicated with my uncle, who was a traditional healer. At that time, he was still alive. After I had communicated with him, I then told him that this is what had happened. I never lied to him. I told him the truth, all the rituals that me and my husband had actually performed. He only said, my daughter, what have you both done there in South Africa? Don't you know these Tokoloshes are not easy to chase away? Once they have entered into a bloodline, they will never leave that bloodline. They are very notorious. What have you done? If you wanted any charms, I could have given you any charms such that you and your husband were going to make a lot of money, and I was going to give you charms that does not require blood. What have you done, my daughter? But I said, uncle, this is where I am right now. Can you please assist me? My husband at that time was still suspended in the air. My uncle then told me to go into the kitchen. So I rushed into the kitchen as he was on the call, and he told me that what I was supposed to do was that I had to take millimil. I took the millimil, and he said that I had to go and start sprinkle and he said that I had to take the millimil and sprinkle it around the house. I was sprinkling this millimil. My uncle had said that I was supposed to repeat after him. He kept on saying that, say me and my husband. And I said, me and my husband, we are not related. We are not related in any kind of way. We only had kids together, but the blood that flows in his body is not the blood that flows in my body. So when these evil demons that he went to collect, when they come, when they want blood, they are not supposed to touch me. They are not supposed to touch my generation. They are not supposed to follow my bloodline. I kept on repeating those words as I was sprinkling the millimil around the house. Then I went into the bedroom and I continued sprinkling everything. And my brother, after I was done, I saw that my husband, it was like there was something that came and placed him on the bed. He didn't fall onto the ground, and he was just placed on the bed. And then he got up and he said, what was I doing? What did I do? I said, you need to return these charms back to the man who gave you these charms. So he then went and he spoke with that taxi boss. After he had spoken with his friend, they went to that Zangoma, and then that man said that since we had already used these charms, he could not accept the charms anymore without any thing in return. My husband said, how much do you want? That healer then said that for me to accept these charms, my charms that I gave you that you have already used, I need at least blood. Sacrifice something so that my shrine will not lose anything. So the only thing that we could sacrifice, the animal that we could sacrifice, at least it was a chicken. Me and my husband, we went to that Sangoma's place and we had 2 black chickens. My husband did his stuff. I said, no, leave me out, count me out. I do not want to touch that stuff, because this was the advice that my mother and my uncle had told me. He then took those chickens and he started sacrificing them. He sacrificed them, my brother. After he had sacrificed them, we then received a strange phone call. This phone call, we do not even know who was speaking with us, but the number, it was from our country, Zim. There was a man who just said, so you have decided to sacrifice your own children. And that person just laughed. Whilst we were driving back from that Sangoma's place, that was when my husband was sent a message by his sister. The sister said that our kids, both of them, they had gone to the river whilst they were herding cattle. And whilst they were at the river, it was like there was a mermaid or a crocodile that dragged them into the river. So the rest of my relatives and my husband's relatives, they were actually even debating on how they were supposed to tell us. They were still looking for a plan to tell us, because this was quite terrible news. My late husband's sister was the one who broke this story to us, and when I heard this story, I just collapsed. And when I woke up, I was in the hospital. In one day, I had lost 2 of my kids. We then returned back home, and when we returned back home, we just lost everything. We lost everything. That taxi, my brother, when it was traveling from Beitbridge, the taxi was stolen and it was never recovered. As for that bakkie, the first one that we bought, it ended up just being something that was useless. It ended up with chickens laying their eggs in that bakkie. It got so much damaged that we failed to fix it. Whenever we would try to get back in business after we had recovered from losing 2 of our kids in one day, we tried to do this business again, but we failed. As for my husband, he died, and when he died, I tried to ask him if there were any other rules that he had been given by that Sangoma that he didn't want to follow. But my husband, he kept on denying. He said, no, they just gave me this lucky charm and they said that we were supposed to bath, and after bathing we had to make love and wash the taxi so that it cannot have any accident. And I did everything that the Sangoma asked me to do. I never did anything wrong. My husband, his mental illness returned back to him. He started screaming, I want blood, I want blood, I want blood, until no one could even communicate with him anymore. It was as if he had forgotten that he was a Shona speaking man. He could only speak with you in Tswana and laugh at you if you could not understand him. He passed away. My husband passed away. And when my husband passed away, I then came to the capital city where I am working currently as a maid. Dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by one of our dear sisters. Yo,